Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We would like to welcome you to our third webinar of our MOps Unlocked series, where we focus on marketing operational challenges we regularly encounter when working with our clients. If this is your first webinar of our MOps Unlocked series, I'd like to give you a quick introduction to CRMT Digital. We are a marketing operations consultancy that helps B2B companies unlock value from their marketing technology investments. My name is Len, and I am Consultancy Director at CRMT Digital. And with me today is Julian Wisdom. Julian, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what we'll be going through today?
Yeah, sure, no problem. My name is Julian Wisdom. I'm a senior MarTech specialist at CRMT and a certified Marketo expert. I've worked on the agency side for around 6 to 7 years, mainly focusing on B2B. In today's webinar, we will go through some best practices to help increase your form fills. We'll go into our recommendations around how you can solve them so that you can increase your form conversions whilst balancing them with other business requirements. Just a heads up, we have a few more webinars lined up, so keep an eye out for future sessions. Across this series, we are aiming to keep the webinar not focused on a specific platform, so the recommendations can be used across marketing automation platforms. Now we've got the introductions out of the way, let's get into the webinar. For today's session, we're going to be focusing on the following: the importance of sales and marketing alignment, the ideal length of forms, the benefits of A/B testing, utilizing progressive profiling, identifying where forms should be placed, and when best to use gated and ungated assets. So let's get into it. Did you know that 81% of users have abandoned an online form after starting to fill it out? Not only is that a very high percentage, but I'm sure all of us have started filling out a form online and then just decided to give up. The fact that 81% of users do this highlights how common it is, but also leads us to wonder why. What are some of the key things that cause us and others to abandon a form once we've begun to fill it out? Here we have the top 4 reasons for form abandonment. Number 1 is security concerns, whereby 29% of users have expressed their uncertainty when filling out a form. Nobody likes the feeling of not knowing what will happen when they fill out a form and provide their personal information. It could be something as simple as noticing they're unable to uncheck an opt-in box, or the form is asking for detailed data at an early stage. Visiting a website for the first time and being asked to provide various amounts of data is enough to make most people abandon a form. The second reason is the form length. I think we can all agree that a long form is just something that most people do not want to have to fill out. Imagine you begin to fill out a form because at the start it only displayed 4 fields, but the more information you provide, the longer the form becomes. That is going to deter you from wanting to provide more information than you expected. And quite frankly, it's quite greedy for this website to want so much information about you. Advertising and upselling are the third top reasons as to why some users abandon forms. When we fill out a form, it's normally because we know what we're expecting. To be in the process of filling out a form and then identify that actually what you thought you were filling out the form for is not actually the case. And instead you're being asked to provide your data so that a business could potentially upsell or advertise something you have no interest in is very deceptive. And finally, the fourth reason is unnecessary questions. Imagine you land on a website to download an ebook on best practices for email subject lines, and the form you have to fill out is asking you what your relationship status is, what your passport number is, what your phone number is, and if you have a washing machine or dryer that is out of warranty. We often have an idea of the data we are willing to share to get something in return, but I'm sure a first name, last name, and email address is enough to download a free ebook.
It's very recognizable. And I have to say, I regularly find all of these issues apply at the same time to some forms. And at the end of the day, forms are never the most exciting thing on the internet. So there's even more reason to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, definitely. So now that we've identified some of the top reasons as to why users abandon a form, let's take a look at how we can combat that. Here are the 5 elements of a form that will be completed and not abandoned, like the form asking you if you have a washing machine that is out of warranty. Clarity, ease, trust, the benefit, and accessibility. Let's start with clarity. Is it clear why someone should fill out the form? Have you provided enough information that lets the user know exactly why they are sharing their data and what they should expect in return? Being directed to a form and you're not sure why you're being asked to provide personal information will most likely prevent a potential lead from filling out the form. It's important that you make it clear why someone should fill out your form, and this can be done through form titles, text above, below, or beside the form, and even in the call to action. Number 2, ease. Is it easy for someone to fill out this form? And how easy is it for someone to fill out the form? These are the 2 questions you should be asking yourself before you push that form live. Being able to convince a potential lead to fill out a form is one thing, but if the form is too complex, confusing, or has errors due to a lack of testing, then it's highly likely you will miss out on potential conversions. When building or creating a form, create it with the user in mind. Put yourselves in their shoes and construct a form that is simple to use, reliable, and gets the job done. Number 3, trust. Before submission, users can often have the thought of, will anything bad happen if I fill out this form? What we want to do is minimize or totally get rid of that thought. But how? How do we provide a sense of security? Well, aside from ensuring that your landing page is designed well, your URL looks trustworthy, and your SSL certificate hasn't expired, make sure you inform visitors how their data will be used by linking to your privacy policy page within your opt-in message. And that is very key. Firstly, you shouldn't be creating any forms without an option to opt in or out to your marketing, along with a privacy message that links to your policy. If you know your forms do not consist of this, I'd recommend coming off this webinar now and addressing that with your legal or GDPR team as soon as possible. Informing users how their data will be collected and having them the option to opt in or out to your marketing provides them with a choice. Having a choice puts the control back in their hands, but also lets them know that you're not trying to be intrusive or deceptive, but instead it builds confidence that you are who you say you are, and they will receive the outcome expected when they submit this form. Number 4, what is the benefit of someone filling out this form? Now, this could be something as simple as when someone submits the form, they will be provided with an asset, a link to a video, or they will be contacted within the next 24 hours. Whatever the benefit is, has that been clearly described and emphasized? Ideally, what you want is for visitors to land on your page and within a short space of time, they've identified that filling out the form is something they need to do because they see the value in filling out the form and want the outcome. So it's important that the benefit of filling out forms is made very clear and consistent throughout the form journey.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately, it's about transparency. Does a user understand why they need to provide the information, and have you made the follow-up clear? For example, if you have a requested trial form and your practice is to have someone in sales call the prospect to find out what they're actually looking for before you give access, fair enough. But explain this is what is going to happen on the page. If you're expecting, as a user, if you're expecting to be sent login details and get called up to get band qualified instead, that's not a great customer experience.
Yeah, correct. So that leads us to the final element. How accessible is your form? Will everyone be able to fill out this form? Have you taken the correct measures to ensure that this form can be used effectively for everyone who encounters it? Len, what are some of the key things people can do, consider, and implement when thinking about form accessibility?
A lot of websites are not easily accessible for people with disabilities, and especially forms can create a real barrier for many people. At the end of the day, we want the web to be usable for all, and that's not just important because you want to increase conversions. I think we also have a moral obligation there. And luckily, there's some really practical steps that you can make forms more accessible. First is to provide instructions within your form labels, especially, for example, whether a field is required or not, or whether the field is expecting data in a certain format, like a date or something. This will get picked up by a lot of different special devices that are used for accessing the internet. Also, make sure to use placeholder text within the field itself that provides some sort of example input. This makes it easier to understand what is expected. So, if there is a date again, then, maybe provide an example of what that date input should look like. And don't forget to use autocomplete for fields where possible. It's easy to do. Most marketing automation platforms have the option built in. However, it amazes me how often it's missed, how many websites have implemented it incorrectly. And especially when you're using custom forms on your website, you need to be aware of this to make sure that it works and test it properly. And finally, there's the use of reCAPTCHA. It's never going to be perfect because it's not the most customer-friendly thing to begin with. But at the very least, use version 3, as that has some functionality built in that makes it a bit more usable for different methods of using the internet, like screen readers, for example. Have a look at the Web Accessibility Initiative on the W3C website for more up-to-date guidance. The good thing about all these tips is that it will also help you with form conversions, simply because they make forms more easy to use by everyone.
Thanks for that, Len. So we briefly discussed some of the main issues around what prevents people from filling out a form and what elements of a form need to be included to encourage conversions. Now we're going to focus on the additional best practices I mentioned at the start of the webinar, as shown on this slide, with the next section focusing on marketing and sales alignment. 87% of sales and marketing leaders say collaboration between sales and marketing enables critical business growth. Yet so many businesses fail to create that much needed alignment between the two teams. It's totally understandable that both teams have their own goals. Sales are focused on leads and closing deals, and marketing are focusing on strategy and conversions. But the reality is the two need each other. From a form strategy perspective, let's take a look at some of the best practices to consider when aligning sales and marketing. Share your goals. It's important that both teams have a clear understanding of what the other team is trying to accomplish. Although these initial conversations can often be difficult, as sales could be seen as being stuck in their ways and marketing seen as though they're not providing what sales need. Once both teams share their goals, it allows for a wider discussion, which takes me to my next point. Define key metrics. 99.9% of the time, the sales team want a phone number, as they can often feel it's easier to close a deal by speaking to leads directly. However, marketing will know that asking for a phone number too early into a lead's journey or on a form where it's not necessary can prevent form submissions and therefore decrease the amount of leads passed through to sales. By defining key metrics, both teams can express what they see value in, explain why it's important, and how this information can be gathered. And that's why it's important to strategize together, not separately, but together. By doing this, both teams can discuss how they are going to reach a centralized goal in the best way possible. Sales may mention the key information they need and may not understand why asking for a full name, phone number, email address, job title, company name, and country can't be collected on one form pointing to a one-page infographic. And this is where marketing can come in and explain the importance of having short forms, nurturing leads, and collecting data over time, so that rather than getting potential leads who put in false information on a long form just to get the asset, instead, the sales team can gather together valuable pieces of information over time and create more quality leads who are happy to share reliable information. Collaboration is another key factor. Rather than making it seem like sales and marketing are two opposing teams, create a sense of collaboration, as this creates a feeling of togetherness, that both teams are working together, understanding each other, and their end goal is achieved. But it doesn't stop there. Communication is key, and communication shouldn't stop after those initial conversations. If both teams are able to stay consistent with communication, then any changes in regards to goals or a shift in key metrics can be shared between the two teams, which means they can work better together and more efficiently. And finally, reporting. Reporting should be shared from both teams so that each team can see what is working, what's not working, and what can be changed. Here's another stat for you. 37% of users will abandon a form that asks for their phone number. And as we just mentioned, the sales team do love a phone number. But sometimes it's a phone number that can cause someone to not want to fill out a form at all, based on the fact they're not at a stage where they are happy to be contacted via phone, especially if it's the first time they've landed on your website. And this is why it's important to not just consider what fields are being used on your forms, but also the length of the form. Nobody wants to land on a web page and the first thing they see is a form asking for way too much information. Keeping the form short and simple allows the visitor to identify it won't take long to fill out the form and therefore encourages conversions. It also lets them know you're not trying to be invasive by asking for too much information. We'd recommend using around 3 form fields, but maybe 4 as a maximum. This can often be first name, last name, email address, and country, or full name, email, country, and potentially job title. The fields you could choose will be relevant to your own goals, but try not to surpass 3 and 4 at the very maximum. Also, don't overcomplicate it. A lot of the time, you begin to overthink and start to include fields that aren't necessarily relevant or needed. But you're trying to collect as much information as possible, you end up creating a form with 6 fields when you probably only needed around 3 or 4. It's important that you only use fields that add value to your goal. Adding fields for the sake of it that aren't useful to sales or marketing is essentially a waste of time. It's better to keep the form as short as possible and collect the fields that actually bring value to you. I've mentioned the phone number field a lot, but I promise I don't have an agenda against it. But if possible, try not to ask for the phone number unless you really need to. Put yourselves in the visitor's position and think, would they be ready to provide their phone number, or would they be more likely to share their email address?
You could look at a web form as a type of transaction where what you ask for should be a reasonable ask for what you provide them in return. And that also means that you need to sell it in a way. For example, if you're asking for an email address, make the case that this is a useful thing for them as well. You might make it clear that you'll send the asset on email so that they can share it with their peers, for example. And if you're okay with that, we will also send you other things that you might be interested in. It's about expressing what the value to them is to provide the information to you.
Yeah, definitely. And the next time you're debating how many fields you should have on a form, remember this. Removing as little as 1 field can boost conversions by as much as 26%. So take the time to identify what fields are essential and what fields can be removed. And remember, you can always collect more lead data in the future, which leads me to my next point, progressive profiling. So for those who are not familiar with this term, progressive profiling allows you to collect lead information over time by displaying new form fields to prospects based on the information you have previously collected on them. Various marketing automation platforms, such as Marketo and HubSpot, allow you to include progressive profiling when creating forms, and it's a great way to collect additional lead data without overwhelming leads with super long forms. So how does it work? From the diagram shown, you will see there are 3 forms. The first time a visitor lands on your website, they will be shown the first form, which asks for their name and email address. If they submit this form, a cookie will be created, which will identify this lead every time they visit your website. If the same lead visits your website at a later date and they come across another form, the cookie will identify that they've been on this website before and they're a known contact. And as progressive profiling has been implemented on the forms, the second form will ask for their company name, their job title, and that's because the cookie remembers them and it has already gathered the name and email address of this contact. The same logic will be applied for the third form. Progressive profiling is a way of keeping your form short, but also allows you to collect new data over time, rather than bombarding people with long forms, which they are more unlikely to fill out. As useful as progressive profiling can be, it's not intended for every form. So as much as you want to use it to gather as much information over time as possible, there are some forms progressive profiling is just not suited for. For example, you wouldn't use it on a contact us form as the visitor is clearly asking to be contacted, which in most cases is a key metric. However, you would use it on a content download because if a lead filled out the form for, say, an infographic and they only provided their first name and email, but visited your webpage again to download a report, this time you could display the email address field along with a job title field. Being that the cookie would identify this visitor as a known lead, the email address should pre-populate, meaning the lead will only have to fill out 1 field, which would be a new piece of information.
And everyone understands that an event form is longer than other types of forms, as you need to have more information, like maybe something like dietary information or other types of interests, etc. So what is reasonable to ask really depends on what the use case is. So events obviously is different from a webinar, from a content asset download, from a contact us form, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So remember, don't scare away potential leads with lengthy forms. Utilize progressive profiling and can collect new data over time, which will be valuable and useful to you. Knowing where to place your form is also just as important as keeping your form short. We recommend always keeping your form at the top of the landing page, as this will be the first thing a visitor will see and encourages them to engage and fill out the form. Placing your form at the top of the landing page makes the visitor's journey much easier. They won't have to scroll before they come across the form. They won't have to try and locate the form. Instead, if they do explore the landing page, they already have a point of reference of where the form is and what it's going to do. And it's not the first thing that they're going to see. It will be the first thing they're going to see when they land on your landing page. Now, this isn't to say that the forms placed anywhere else on the landing page won't convert. If you've applied the best practices we've discussed so far and provide enough clarity as to what the call to action is, then placing the form in different locations should be fine. For example, if for maybe design purposes, you don't want your form at the very top of the landing page and would prefer it to be in the middle or the bottom, then ensure that you provide the visitor with enough information that isn't too text heavy, but keeps them interested. Emphasize the call to action and guide them to your form. Another alternative, if you don't want to have your form at the top of your landing page, is to use anchor links. You can have a call to action button at the top of your landing page or within the first paragraph that when a visitor clicks the call to action button, it will direct them to the form. Whether you decide to have your form at the top, middle, or bottom of the landing page, the most important thing to do is test and see what works for you.
And it matters a lot whether a user is expecting a form or not. If it is clear that a visitor is getting sent to an event registration page, just to return to the previous example, there's no reason why you wouldn't have the form at the top. Visitors often don't even want to read the page because they've already made the decision that they want to register. But if it's a product page, for example, then it might make sense to have a contact us form all the way at the bottom or halfway through, because the main reason they're visiting that page is not to fill out a form, it's to find out more about the product. But at the end of it, they might be interested and want to have the ability to contact you. So again, context is everything.
Yeah, definitely. 58% of businesses use A/B testing for conversion rate optimization. Creating your form, applying it to your landing page, and just hoping it converts isn't enough. It's important that you utilize A/B testing to see what works for you, what your audience reacts with, what they engage with the most, and what version provides the most conversions. Let's create a scenario. Imagine you're running a marketing campaign promoting a free ebook. Rather than having only one landing page, you could create 2 landing pages that direct to the same asset. This will then allow you to change certain elements on each landing page, and then you can identify which landing page gathered the most downloads. From a form strategy perspective, here are some of the elements you should consider when A/B testing. Titles and subheadings. Use different keywords on each variation of the landing page to see which word captures your audience attention. Text and the copy. Try changing the tone of the text for each version, as this will allow you to identify what tone your audience engages or reacts to the most. And images. Have different variations on each landing page. For example, if you're offering a free ebook, you could have an image of the ebook on one landing page and an image of someone at their laptop as if they were reading the ebook. This will allow you to identify which images work well with your audience and if they relate to pictures with people in them or if they relate more to pictures of products. And colors. Try including different colors on each version of the landing page to see what colors work well. Ensure that you stick within your brand guidelines, but also ensure that the colors you're using fall in line with the web content accessibility guidelines. Form design. Now here you can have a different number of form fields to see which form gathers the most in conversions. For example, you could have one page that has the recommended 3 form fields and another form that has 5 fields because the sales team have asked if there's a way to include some additional key fields. Then when it's time for reporting, sales and marketing can meet up and see which version gathered the most conversions. You can also change the design of the form and see which style of the form works better. And finally, the call to action. This is in regards to the submit button on the form and any text above the form. Rather than just having a submit button, you could have one version of the form where the call to action button says download now, and on the other version of the form, it could say get the ebook. Whatever you choose to change, we recommend A/B testing as much as possible, as this will give you insight into what's working well, what your audience engages with, and what they relate to. Then from the results of the test, you can implement what's worked well moving forward, and you should see an increase in your conversions. 81% of users decide not to download content because of a form. Now, that is an extremely high percentage, but rather than interpreting this stat as let's stop using forms, instead, you need to ask yourself, does this require a form? Which leads me to my final point, gated versus ungated assets. Gated assets are assets that require a person to fill out a form before they can get the asset, and the ungated asset can be accessed without a person needing to fill out a form. There are benefits of using both gated and ungated assets. With gated assets, you're able to gather lead information, which can then be used for various marketing campaigns and lead nurturing. Gain the visitor's trust, as once they've downloaded an asset, they will feel more comfortable and confident when being asked to provide their details in the future, and drive conversions by providing an incentive like an asset. You can encourage form fills and drive more conversions. There are also benefits to using an ungated asset. As an ungated asset doesn't require a form, it's not intrusive. It allows the visitor to know that you're happy to provide value without asking them to provide their details. This also builds trust, as once an ungated asset has been downloaded, if the person has found value in it, they are more likely to be willing to provide their data when they are required to fill out a form to receive an asset. Ungated assets also generate awareness. By offering free assets, people can find out more information about your business, and this ungated asset could spark interest and cause people to want to find out more.
Having content available that's ungated, it supports SEO, it supports organic traffic. It matters a lot what type of asset you're promoting, but in a lot of cases, the increased traffic is way more valuable than the possibility of a form submit. You might be worried that you're missing out on the opportunity to communicate with those visitors about your products, but at the end of the day, the best indicator that people are ready to talk to you is when they tell you that they're ready to talk.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Len. So in both instances, there are benefits, but it's just about working out what assets you feel require a form and what assets can be left ungated. So in summary, here are some of the key things to remember. Ensure you have alignment between your sales and marketing team. Keep your form short with a recommended number of 3 fields, and you're aiming for 3 fields, but a maximum of 4 fields is also fine. Implement progressive profiling where possible. A/B test your forms, form position, and landing pages. And a recommendation that we have is to always have your forms display at the top of your landing pages, so that it is the first thing that people see when they land on the web page. And finally, identify when best to use gated and ungated assets.
Thanks, Julian. That was great. If I summarize this for myself, I think the recommendations are don't be greedy. Consider the requirements beyond just marketing when you're using forms, and customer experience ultimately trumps everything.
Yeah, correct.
Let me ask you a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, cool.
Does it matter what kind of field types you're using? Does it impact form conversion?
So I would say that this is dependent on why certain field types are being used. If we were to compare free text and pick clicks field types, for example, then a form that uses free text fields for every field could make the process of filling out the form a bit longer. However, a pick list could make the process seem easier. In both cases, you need to identify when best to use a free text field or a pick list field. So let's take job title, for example. If you were to use a free text field, people can type in their job title, but then they also have the option to type in anything just to submit the form. And then you can start to see unreliable data. But if you were to use a pick list, but the pick list had over 20 values to select from, then this could also make it could also make filling out the form feel very long-winded. But this wouldn't apply to, say, the country field, as it's expected for there to be a list of all countries. But you would just need to ensure that when a person starts to type in their country, the pick list will direct them to that section of the value that they've been typing in. However, if you had a pick list that was only asking for a high-level job function, such as, say, HR, marketing, or sales, then the form would be more user-friendly. I think the impact on form conversions is more associated with what we have discussed today, such as the length of the form and how easy and accessible it is. But if a form that follows best practices uses free field text or pick list fields or different field types with a certain set number of values, then it should not be too impactful on conversions.
Great, thanks. That's a great answer. Thanks, Julian. I have another question. Would you say it's a good idea to ask information such as industry and company size on a form?
I think asking for information such as industry and company size can impact conversions. I think that's because it's an additional piece of information and it might not be clear to the visitors why they need to provide that information. But there are different routes that we can take. So platforms like Ringlead and Zoom Info, they're able to enrich your data, your existing data, based on the current information that they have in their databases. So if you already collected a lead's first name, last name, and email address, when you enrich the data, you can gather additional information such as industry, company size, total revenue, and much more. The data enrichment is dependent on what data is available though, and in some cases, the data quality is better for certain regions. I think it's also important to note that enriching firmographic data is often better for larger companies. So these are some of the things that you need to be mindful of. But I would still recommend using data enrichment platforms to gather additional data rather than potentially impacting conversions by, say, creating longer forms or asking for what some visitors may seem as unnecessary information and questions.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Final question then. So for some use cases, chatbots have been replacing forms over the last few years. When would you say it is better to use chatbots over forms, if at all?
I think it's all dependent on the actual incentive. So for example, if you had a contact us page and you wanted a visitor to feel like they could speak to someone, then a chatbot could be used in that instance. However, it could also be argued that using the chatbot could be a longer process than filling out a short form. Chatbots also require quite a lot of time to create and set up. So you would need to ask yourself if it is actually necessary. Also, using a chatbot to answer frequently asked questions could be useful. So then rather than a visitor having to search through your website, the chatbot could provide them with the answer or direct them to the correct page. So I think it is down to preference, but I think for some marketing activities, a conventional form that uses best practices is a better option.
Makes sense. Yeah, I totally agree. Chatbots can be great, but some of the flows you see out there are really not helpful. And I would say a bad chatbot is worse than no chatbot at all. Yeah, thanks, Julian, so much for your insight on how to increase form conversions. That was really helpful. For all of you listening out there, thanks for your time. We hope this was useful to you. Drop us a line if you have any feedback or questions. This was the third installment of MOPS Unlocked. We will be sending you the recording so you can share them with your friends or colleagues. And look out for the invite on the next episode in our series. Thanks again for joining and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.